All right, clock strikes 11. We'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Judd Moore. I'm Success's product manager, and I'll be leading our session today. Just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started. My colleague Vanessa Bryant is facilitating today, and we'll watch the chat for questions. I'll pause at intervals to solicit questions, but feel free to raise your hand if you'd like, and Vanessa can call on you to ask your question after you unmute. Or if you want to, use chat to submit your questions, that's fine too. But we decided to do an actual Teams meeting versus a live event so that we can actually see each other and you can ask questions live. So feel free to take advantage of that and just raise your hand. Getting started now, as I've experienced both how success has changed and how our market has changed in the last few years, I kept coming across a few concepts that are relevant to the hybrid era in which we all find ourselves now, right? I'm an advocate of adoption and change management practices, so my goal in this session is just to introduce you to some fundamental concepts and some accompanying tactics in a few different areas that can help your organization with the changes we all face in the hybrid area, specifically related to modern collaboration and communication practices. So that's what we're doing. To set the stage with Success's experience and what I've witnessed and been a part of, we've undergone a transformation in the last few years due to a few key changes. The first being a hybrid work from office and work from home environment. Secondly, rapid growth with accompanying network effect. Sometimes that's advantageous, sometimes not so much. And the third, new digital tools at our fingertips, many of which have always-on capabilities, mostly through the Microsoft 365 suite of applications, with which many of you, if not all, are familiar, I'd imagine. Now, the confluence of those factors began to expose some strains on attention and collaboration at Success. Growing pains, you might say. I'd imagine you can relate. So today I'll walk through some of the concepts and techniques that have helped Success modernize our collaboration and communication practices. Before we do that, let's take a look at some of the key elements of modern collaboration, just to get some definition around that. Modern collaboration in our always-on, increasingly digital world, it's a great thing. I mean, we should really encourage and foster it, and also be aware of some of the challenges that come with it. By framing things up in a few areas, we'll be better off both in accelerating the benefits of modern collaboration and in dealing with some of the accompanying growing pains we'll inevitably encounter. So the focus areas are these. First, attention management. Secondly, MoCA, that stands for Modern Collaboration Architecture. That's a Microsoft term. In short, it's using the right tool for the right job. And we'll take a look at a framework today. And then third, understanding the flow of communications and information in our organizations. Really, though, even more fundamental than all these, in my experience, is a necessary mindset and culture shift that underpins it all. So we'll touch on that today as well. Now, to frame up the relationship among these elements of modern hybrid collaboration, let's take a look at a diagram called the collaboration pyramid. It lays out the relationship among the elements of modern collaboration to business outcomes, which reside at the top. Our business outcomes are enabled, of course, by collaboration, which is in turn enabled by the flows of communication and information within an organization as a whole, and also within its subparts. But underneath all the flow and the outcomes, at the base of our pyramid is individual attention. You can't accomplish much if you don't have people's attention and interest, right? Sort of fundamental, but also sort of brilliant. We at Success strongly believe attention is an extremely valuable and finite resource. And in fact, through an emphasis on demultitasking for several years now, we've seen some remarkable results in freeing up capacity in our business as we've implemented that successfully in many areas, especially within individual departments. But it's, of course, much harder to communicate and collaborate cross-functionally across teams that don't share a common purpose. However, when done effectively, cross-functional collaboration produces amazing results. Now, given the confluence of factors at Success that I mentioned earlier, the hybrid environment, work from office plus work from home, of course, the challenge of the network effect and the always-on digital tools, my experience is that investing effort across 4 particular areas will really accelerate your results. So let's take a look at those. And that's where we'll spend the bulk of our time today, is in these 3 areas. First, fostering attention management practice. Second, considering how the MOCA, that modern collaboration architecture, can shape communications and information flow and really meet people at their point of need. Third, watching for collaborative overload and burnout. And then fourth, and I would argue most fundamentally, building trust. So we'll cover all those areas in brief today. That's where we're going to spend most of our time. Just keep in mind, there's so much to this hybrid world. It's kind of a buzzword, right? And there's a lot of elements that'll be out of scope for today. We can't cover it all. But it's my goal that by the end of this session today, you'll have learned something useful or be inspired to re-examine how you work or look up a new tool or resource, some element of value. That's my goal today, is just to help you along your journey. So starting with that foundation of our collaboration pyramid, we'll look first at attention management. And if you're not familiar, you might say, all right, what's that? I mean, on its face, you can guess, right? So you might think, well, why is that, Judd? Why attention management? Maybe I'm familiar with time management. What is attention management? Why is it better? Simply put, allocating time to perform an activity, or as I'd say it more colloquially, just working on something, that doesn't always work if it will receive constant interruptions and distractions all the time. Anybody relate to that? I know I can. So we should stop worrying so much about time management, although that's still important, and focus on attention management. How do you do that? Well, I don't think I'm an expert, but I've learned some things, and here's what my experience is. Striving for shorter and more deliberate and planful meetings is exceedingly helpful. And one way to kind of focus attention in on those meetings and maximize the use of time is having a focused agenda. I like to use the 5 Ps approach: purpose, product in the sense of what is the outcome of a given meeting, having the right people in the room, no more, no less, process, and pre-work. Super, super effective. Isn't necessarily new stuff, but is really important, and in my experience is sometimes poorly executed on, and I'm pointing at myself when I say that. As I've facilitated work cross-functionally across success in my role as product manager, dealing with a wide variety of audiences and constituencies, the more that I can follow that 5P agenda, the better my meetings run and the less time I'm spending there. Next up, clear roles. So if you're hosting a meeting that's participatory and collaborative, think like a party host. If somebody's disengaged, check in on them. That kind of round robin thing really helps, especially some of the more introverted folks speak up and carves out time for them to introduce their ideas. Sometimes that's some of the most valuable material is, from kind of underrepresented or people that just don't have a chance to get a word in edgewise among some of us who don't hesitate to put our voices into the conversation. So for me, it was just a mindset shift when I came across that idea of, if I'm hosting, it should be no different than a party. Check in, invite people into the conversation, facilitate that way. Also, in terms of norms, don't try and do it all yourself. I've tried that. You're not going to be able to facilitate effectively and keep time and take notes and all that. So you might enlist some of your coworkers, but also, kind of to our point today, there's a lot of features that can help you do that. Did you know that there's a feature in a lot of Teams meetings that can automatically transcribe the meeting, and it will attribute the transcription to who's speaking in the record? It's pretty neat. It's pretty awesome. Really helped me with note taking. I don't necessarily need a note taker in a lot of my meetings anymore. So just one example of kind of how the tools can help facilitate. Next up, re-examining your rituals. Research shows that most individuals' peak time for flow is between 8 and 10 a.m. So just examine when your meetings might best take place. I mean, humans are creatures of habit. We all know this, but how often do we pause and actually look at what we're doing and kind of reconfigure that? Next point is encouraging asynchronous work. Often the hardest part of collaboration is getting together with people, but if we're clear on what our overall purpose is for a given initiative or project, and we're using the same tools and norms, we can get an awful lot of work done individually and working apart. Now, let's be clear. I'm not suggesting that collaboration shouldn't take place synchronously, but I am suggesting that often in the past, a default was, I need to talk to so-and-so about X. But if I re-examine the needs and purpose of the initiatives in play, and I'm clear on that, I can cover those projects in batches and the check-ins and do a lot of the work individually. Some keys to success here include limiting version sprawl for documents, which you can accomplish in Microsoft 365 by using OneDrive and SharePoint and other centralized file repositories like Teams, where people can work in the same version of documents by using links rather than attachments. And also leveraging the power of video recordings. I mean, we're recording this webinar right now, and we'll, of course, reuse it for our audience, but there's no reason that you can't do that internally. To give you just an example, in product and service development that I facilitated success, it's a pretty busy audience. It's a lot of the executive team, a lot of the managers. As you imagine, in the regularly scheduled meetings, sometimes folks can't make it. So we have a cultural norm that if you can't make it, that's okay, but you're responsible for reviewing the recording and the transcript, and then you put your 2 cents in, or we move ahead without you. And you get a week to do that. So not trying to bulldoze anybody, but we also don't let progress be impeded by the inability to meet synchronously. So just an example for you for that. Third, plan focus time. And the key here is planning and minimizing distractions. So focusing in on what's most important and what do I need to focus on. And I'm sure you've heard this, but if you're not doing it, I promise you, it's, for me anyway, it's life-changing. Turn off your email alerts and then take your phone and put it away. So schedule it on your calendar, have a plan for what you're going to accomplish, and get those distractions out of your way. It will put you into a state of flow, and you will be so much more productive. I started working towards this. I'm not great at it, but I'm better than I used to be a few years ago, and it has been seriously revolutionary. And the phone thing, I get it, it's hard, and I also understand some of you are in roles where you have to monitor. I understand, that is what it is. But if you don't have to be on call right there all the time, and you can carve out that focus time and have a plan for it, you're going to be so much more productive, and you're going to be able to harness your attention and really get things done. Okay, enough of that. The next tier up in our collaboration pyramid is the communication and information flow through an organization. So we'll walk through Microsoft's modern collaboration architecture for short. But before we move on, I've said an awful lot of things. Vanessa, do we have any questions?
I'm not seeing any in the chat, and I don't have any hands raised.
Okay. Well, I'll just repeat again for the some folks I know have joined in a little bit late, which is fine. If you want to put questions in the chat, you can do that. Otherwise, if you'd like to raise your hand at any time, I'm happy to take questions. I'll pause periodically, and Vanessa will flag them for me. So we'll keep moving on here, but just know that that's available to you. So this MoCA, Modern Collaboration Architecture, was designed by Microsoft to address 2 key challenges. The first is to help you drive digital culture change across your organization. And the primary way it does that is by an understanding of the dynamics that need to be addressed at 4 levels: individual, team, community, and organizational. We'll look at them in turn, and each of these levels has different needs. That leads to the second challenge MoCA can help address, which is to address which tool when, and help demonstrate how all the different tools are designed to integrate together to deliver a unified collaboration experience across your organization. So it's just a model that kind of shows the interplay between those 4 areas. We'll start with the individual. Nothing too groundbreaking or revolutionary here. Obviously, organizations hire individuals for their skills and experiences. And in order to best utilize these skills and experiences, employees need to be able to deliver against a number of different needs, right? Got to do all these things. Microsoft 365 has a number of tools and applications. You're probably familiar with some of the basics that help individuals with what they need. Of course, email is a common one. That's best for one-way instructional communication. OneDrive is another common one that helps individuals store documents so they can be accessed anywhere, anytime, on any device securely. And then, of course, Outlook. You're probably familiar with that, besides email, calendaring, some basic task management and whatnot, right? So again, no real surprises here, I'd imagine. You can see the set of tools. And by the way, all this MoCA stuff, it's available online. If you search Modern Collaboration Architecture Microsoft, you can find it. So don't worry about seeing all the details on the slides. You can find all that later if you'd like. So yeah, no surprises on the individual level, but it gets way more interesting when we start to look at the team level. That's next up. And in MoCA, A team is defined as a group of individuals with interdependent activities that work together towards a common goal. Now, this is key. Just because a group of people report up to the same manager, that doesn't make them a team by default. What makes them a team is the interdependence in their work, and that's what creates the need for collaboration. So on a team, to be successful, we need a strong supportive framework combined of that outcome, or I like to say purpose. What's the purpose? What's the direction? That needs to be set via strong leadership, which is accountable for the delivery of the outcome and facilitated by well thought out and optimized processes, right? And needs access to the right skills organized by defining the roles and responsibilities of the various team members. So to be an effective collaborator in a team, employees need a variety of different capabilities again, and these are different capabilities and thus different tools that Microsoft has queued up to meet these needs. Some of them have overlap, but it's different in a team context, how we're going to accomplish those. So just like Outlook is where individuals go to organize themselves, I bet you can guess which tool I'm going to pick for the team context, right? I mean, we've all heard of it at this point. It's Teams, but there's some other ones in here. Let me tell you a story about Teams, though. At Success, our security operations team is every single day reviewing innumerable security advisories, incidents, and vulnerabilities. And once in a while, there's a new big thing, and you'll hear about it in the news sometimes. The chatter's always there in the background for security professionals. You don't always hear about it, but once in a while, you hear about it on the news. Some big vulnerability, right? And when it's a new big 0 day, we call them vulnerability, previously unknown, it requires near immediate collaboration and response that spans a lot of our organization. It involves an SME on the marketing team. It involves our executive team. It involves our security professionals. And we don't typically interact, in that sort of urgent way. And we're not necessarily always talking on the day-to-day across those groups. Now, historically, in response to an incident, emails, boom, boom. I mean, you can just imagine, right? But since we've adopted Teams, we have an emergency response team, and for each new incident, we create a new channel where we can coordinate our response to that. That means that we have both, IM capabilities, so communications capabilities. We have file capabilities built right in there, so everybody can work on the same file versions, and we can comment in that same file version, so we can basically point at it, right, to say what we want to say. And then there's also different levels of ability to get somebody's attention, back to the attention management, that just doesn't exist in email. You can at people. You can mark an IM as urgent, and it will alert and flag people if it's truly urgent. Now, you want to use that sparingly, right, and not overuse it, but those capabilities are there, and they just don't exist in email. So that's my point. The old ways of doing things, they just can't meet the need. They can't keep up. Think about this, too. If someone new needs to join in the response and we're using email, we can't add them into that group. We have to dig up all that stuff and send them to them. Attachments in emails, the communications in email. How terrible is that? But in Teams, all the communication assets and files are right there as somebody's joined to the team. Revolutionary. I mean, it really, really is. Anyway, you get it. And there's a lot of other tools for team, the tasks that teams need to accomplish, planner. You see the icons there. I'm not going to go on and on. You get it. But just want to draw this context, high level. Changing from the old to the new ways can yield just vast improvements. I'm pretty passionate about this stuff, if you can tell. Anyway, moving on. Next up, in addition to our individual jobs and team-focused work, really we need to keep growing as individuals, right? There's this 70-20-10 model. It's a learning and development model that suggests a proportional breakdown of how people learn. 70% comes from on-the-job experience, 20% from feedback and developmental relationships, and 10% from formal training and courses. Typically, we each work closely with around, smallish groups of, 8 to 16 people on a regular basis in our days. And that's where most of our learning comes from, is that close-knit group. But wouldn't it be great if, in addition to that close-knit group, we could learn from people across our whole organization, really sharing experiences and developing new relationships? That's where the idea of communities comes in this MoCA, modern collaboration architecture. Communities have certain attributes. They're defined as groups of individuals with a common interest or a common passion. So let's dig into that a little bit. they have different needs. Communities are great places for employees to find and share information. Innovation is really facilitated by communities. And it's a great place for employees to learn by exchanging experiences and skills. If I can cross paths with the people that I don't in my day-to-day, there's a lot of value in that, right? That helps leadership keep employees engaged, promote transparency, and facilitate diversity and inclusion. Maybe your ears perked up on that last one. Now, it's important to know the attributes of community. Community, as it says there, is typically facilitated by an actual facilitator to help meet the needs. All right, Judd, well, why do I care? What are the benefits? Healthy communities drive knowledge creation, retention, and application across the organization, and they help employees stay tuned in across the organization. And really, it's kind of a longer timeline. Harness the collective power and wisdom of the whole organization and kind of capture that and store it for future generations of workers as part of the key value proposition. Now, in terms of tools, Microsoft touts Yammer. I've never actually used that. That's that blue icon there. Personally, I'm not knocking it. I just can't speak to its efficacy, but I can tell you we at Success have some communities, and we're using Teams to facilitate those communities. We have a facilitator for one community specifically around D&I, and that's going very well. Teams has been just a fine tool for that. I tend to think Yammer fits in bigger enterprise organizations with thousands of employees. That's not at all me saying it wouldn't fit in the SMB. I just don't have experience to speak to it, and Teams has worked well for us for what it's worth. Next up, let's just look at some of the differences between a team and a community. The reason being, for me, this comparison really illustrated the value of communities and how it's important to treat communities and teams differently. So remember, the definition of team is a group of individuals with interdependent activities that work together towards a common goal. That means that membership is mandatory in a team because there's a dependency, right? We talked about the recommended team size and the focus on outcome, delivery, or really purpose, aligned with strategic priority of the organization. Now think about this. Each interdependency within an activity creates additional risk, actually, towards achieving the outcome. Because if the team is too big, the network effect will work against you. There's just too many connections if our team's too big, right? So for teams, it's critical to manage the team size and the efficiency in processes. On the other hand, with communities, membership is optional. It's based on interest or passion. As employees need to tackle different challenges, the community membership also changes. And in contrast to teams where the network effect of a large team works against you, in communities, the larger the community, the more perspectives members can benefit from. And whereas teams focus on outcome delivery, communities are there again to ensure that employees are learning, growing, innovating, and sharing that organizational experience. And of course, with hybrid, as we all know, the engagement of employees in organizational culture and experience is just much more difficult. So framing things up in terms of a community and using the right tools and having some facilitation in communities is really going to help in the hybrid world. I mentioned that D&I initiative at Success. We have a council made up of volunteer members, but we do have a person that leads and facilitates that, and it's somewhat self-organizing, but there's still someone leading and driving it. And again, we use Teams as the primary platform for communications and information transfer. And again, kind of like I described in that security response, in community, it's so much more important because the size of the membership is larger to be using something like Teams, whatever your platform is, something like Teams rather than email, because if, with a larger membership, gosh, if you're trying to forward and manage via email, all that as members, new members focus in, it's going to be a mess. So you get it. That's all I have to say about that. We'd much rather spend time focusing on what we need to do than digging around looking for information. Take some effort on the front end to organize it, but the dividends are, I was going to say immeasurable. That's probably overstated, but they're big in my experience. All right, moving on. The fourth dimension to understanding organizational dynamics via this modern collaboration architecture is to explore the organizational capabilities around collaboration. Take a look at that. For an organization to be productive and demonstrate good behaviors, the leadership of that organization needs to develop the right enablement culture through new ways of collaborating, communicating, and sharing information. focusing on creating a learning mindset. According to research done by the change management consultancy experts at ProSci, the number one obstacle to success for a major change is ineffective executive sponsorship. It's a little uncomfortable to say that, but in my experience, I can see how that might be true. And I can see how the inverse might be true. Effective executive sponsorship can just rocket a new initiative into productivity. So this organizational perspective just lays out some of the generic capabilities that need to be established across the wider organization. I'll give you an example. Just coincidentally, today we're having a town hall. You know, through the pandemic, we couldn't meet in person, and we started having these monthly town halls. Well, how do we do that? On Teams. We have a meeting like this, we record it, people can chat. It's actually a lot of fun. People are hilarious in chat. You can do things virtually that you couldn't do in person. It's a lot of fun. You can't post a meme in the air when you're meeting in person. I'm not suggesting I wouldn't rather meet in person sometimes, but there's some upside too, right? So just an example for you of kind of part of the organizational need being expressed in tools. So that's the overview of MoCA. Video really plays a big role at that organizational level. And again, I'm not going to go deep in with all those tools. You can see a little bit of Teams there. SharePoint becomes more important in a wider context, but that's the overview. So you can see the interplay here. I mean, they feed each other, right? It's as I mentioned, this model you can find if you Google Microsoft Modern Collaboration Architecture and take a look at all this stuff in more detail if you want. More tactically, I want to highlight another few assets that might help you out. They've been helpful to me, you know, as I in my journey through this stuff. The first is called the Periodic Table of Office 365. Just Google Periodic Table of Office 365. It'll be the first hit, and then a URL jump to 365. I like it because it shows tools, all the tools that you see listed out here, and you can click on like, okay, if I need to assign tasks, it shows you your option, and then it shows you which licenses have those capabilities. But perhaps more importantly, I'd also suggest reviewing that blog. That author is a Microsoft MVP. His name is Matt Wade, and he has amazing features on the newest and best stuff coming out in 365. Things like webinars and Teams, syncing files in OneDrive, Teams and SharePoint to computers and phones, and approval flows via Teams. I'm going to tell you a story about that last one to illustrate some of the actual return on using these applications, a lot of which you're probably already licensed for if you're using Office 365. Approval flows. In the past, our accounting and sales and management teams would handle credit requests for invoice adjustments via email. So say a customer, you know, we made an error in billing, or the customer isn't happy, whatever, there's some need to adjust the invoicing via credit. All happen in email, lots of back and forth, tracking people down. But I don't know, I'd say maybe a year, 18 months ago, we implemented an approval flow via Teams. Check this out. This approval flow saves just the accounting team at least 15 hours per month. And besides the time, it also helps manage their attention. The info is focused in a dashboard rather than an email, and it saves time and attention for other people as well. That's that 15 hours per month. That's not even considering the sales people. All right. So if you think about that investment, I don't know how much time they spent creating it, but I know it wasn't more than like 20 hours. That's a pretty good return on investment. From now until infinity to recoup 15 hours per month for a 20-hour investment, you can see how it's valuable to do that. Now, I get that it's hard to find the time to make those investments, but it's well worth it if you carve out and execute on projects like that. Another resource I wanted to point out is if you do end up looking up the Modern Collaboration Architecture, there's an individual MoCA assessment on that website near the bottom of the page. Well worth taking a look at that. It kind of brings it down to the more tactical about like, okay, how am I measuring up? How are my teams measuring up? How are we organizationally measuring up to what's outlined here? Okay. All right, enough of that MoCA. Let's take a look at a flow chart next that helps illustrate some of these communications tools available to an individual. But before I do that, I'm going to pause and ask Vanessa again, are there any questions, any hands up, anything in the chat that we need to address?
I'm not seeing any
Hearing
hands. We're a
none.
shy bunch
Okay.
today.
Okay, no worries. It's a lot to take in here. I know it's newish stuff. We'll keep going. So I came across this chart and I really like it. It illustrates a little more concretely using some of the communications tools. So if I'm an individual here, I might use email, as I mentioned, for a one-way instructional broadcast. Email still has its place. I'm not against email. But if I need follow-up, in some instances, IM is better. One to few or one to one. Quicker response, right? We move to voice, less there. But what I really want you to see here is the power of video and mass presentation. I alluded to it earlier. We're doing it right now. And notice at the bottom, from the transactional to the more long-term value, of course, in-person is best, but there's trade-offs, right? So my point in showing you this is just think about what you're doing. What's your purpose? Who's your audience? And match up the right tools. It's difficult to make these changes, to change the habits for your communication style. But in my experience, the fruits of doing so, again, are just huge. So I don't have more insights than that to share. For me, something just clicked in when I saw this chart, and it framed it up in a way that allowed me to challenge some of my previous thinking and spot some of my habits that I hadn't previously been able to see before. So I wanted to be sure to share it with you so you have it for reference material. You can find it in that Mocha set of materials from Microsoft if you want to take a look at it more in depth. Okay. Moving on. Let's just wrap up on a couple of Mocha things. So some best practice suggestions you might consider implementing if they are already in place at your organization, or further refining them if they are in place. Use modern files. You heard me talk about version sprawl and working in the same document collaboratively. Until you've experienced it, I don't think that you can really understand how important that can be and how great it can be versus having a version over here, trying to merge those two. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have had that experience. Learning how files work in OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint and the relationship among them is something that Success can help you with. I'm not here to sell you anything, but we did develop a product that helps with that. It's a key skill, and the ROI there is huge. If you're stuck in the version sprawl in the attachment world, we can help you with that. Next, task assignment, content and communications about that. Planner is a pretty great tool. Now, if you have professional project management needs, Microsoft has its project application, and there's a number of other applications. I'm not suggesting that Planner is going to meet everyone's needs. It's not meant for super in-depth, detailed projects, but I will tell you, for the kind of projects that I'm running and developing product, and the fact that we already own the license, and here's what I really want you to know, for individual productivity, Planner's amazing. I can flag all of my stuff, put it in different buckets, color code it. I can see in a dashboard view when due dates are. I can attach files to it so I don't have to leave context and again go dig around and look for stuff. I can assign tasks to people. I can communicate in there with people. Pretty great. So consider that. I mean, that's just such a key skill, right? Assigning work to other people, bringing it all together, seeing it in a dashboard view. Consider using Planner. Take work content out from processes. We talked about that approval flow, and there's so many other opportunities to do that. And then again, really video, and again, that automated transcription for asynchronous communication is huge. I'll give you an example of that. Excuse me, I got to take a drink. Scratchy throat. So Vanessa and I work on the marketing team, and part of what marketing does is promotion, obviously. So when we go interview subject matter experts, we can just flip on that automated transcription, talk to that person, capture literally everything they had to say, go examine that script later, and pull out all that goodness and write it. And we can do that individually. We don't have to have a note taker there. So if you're not using that automated transcription, it's pretty amazing. It's not going to be a fit for all of you, but in certain contexts, it's a great tool. All right. That's it for the modern collaboration architecture stuff. Next, going back to our 4 focus areas I framed up on the front end, we'll move on to this collaborative overload and burnout. And really, the idea is just this. If we're not doing a good job managing attention and collaborating, we're going to run into this dark side of collaboration. Not this, but this. These are symptoms of a phenomenon called collaboration overload. I would imagine that some of those seem familiar to you. And here's what I'll say. When we spot overload and burnout, it's worth taking a look at the systemic factors in play. I don't have a magic bullet for you. I really don't. But I'm certain that attention management and modern collaboration play a role. I mean, if you look at the dates on some of the citations there, I realize they're kind of small. Excuse me. It predates even the pandemic when we were forced into a more virtual world, right? But just consider, when you spot collaborative overload and burnout, how much time do we spend talking about work versus doing it? How much time are we spending in meetings and email versus actually, doing work? What redundancies are there, and what are we doing after hours? And what are our boundaries and the cultural norms that support or don't support that? Research shows that there's an epidemic. It's not gotten better in the last couple of years, I'll tell you that. And moreover, more than anything, it's really a systems problem and not a personal problem. Again, there isn't like a magic bullet answer, but I am certain that if we can remove work content, which is hard when you're stuck in it, you're kind of stuck in a cycle to invest additional time, but if we can remove work content, which we can with the tools that are available to us, and we can change our habits and norms for communication and collaboration, we're going to be so much better off. So the reason I'm mentioning this is there are real costs to this. It's kind of hard to measure, so it's hard to cite statistics, but you can tell when it's there. Back to that last slide. If you're someone who manages teams, keep your finger on the pulse of that, check in with your employees and be aware of this phenomenon, and think about attention management and changing your digital habits in your culture, your accompanying cultural practices in relation to that. All right. Early on, I mentioned a mindset and culture change. We'll take a look at that, and then we'll close it up here by looking at virtual trust after that. If you don't remember anything else I say today, remember this. Hybrid and modern collaboration is a process. It is not a project. What do you mean, Judd? I mean, it's ongoing. You're going to have to iterate. You're going to have to discover your needs and wants and refine them periodically, probably from now until infinity. So this isn't something you can, figure it out, put a bow on, and you're good to go. It's going to continue to evolve. And as you do that, remember also, trade-offs are inevitable. I mean, in-person is great, right? We love it. A lot of us wanted to get back to that, but there's a trade-off. I like not having a commute, you know what I mean? And so there's that interplay between business and personal. That's just one example. My point is more broad. There are going to be trade-offs, and if you think in that context versus I want this or I want that, you're seeing both sides of the equation. You can make a better decision that sometimes is a win-win versus just considering what's immediately in front of you. Trade-offs are just part of the equation. Know what you're willing to trade, when, and why, as you're considering what you want to do there, and you got to do it iteratively. There's a great article on the HBR for any of your subscribers there. If you're not, I'd highly recommend it. Best $100 a year I spend. And it's entitled "To Make Hybrid Work, Solicit Employees' Input." Go take a look at that, and that will frame this up for you. I'm not going to read the article to you or anything like that, but go take a look at that article. To make hybrid work, solicit employees' input, and it will help you frame up how to think about some of this kind of stuff, how to uncover those needs and wants within your organization, within your reports, and what to do about that. Great set of discovery questions and a way to think through that. Now, in terms of tools, the key here is really having your leadership, again, back to that executive sponsorship, the leadership of an organization, both at the top and then the middle management, really needs to foster a culture of experimentation and openness. There's so much power and capabilities in all the tools that are available these days, Microsoft 365 and outside that ecosystem. And most of us are not using it to its full capabilities. We're really just scratching the surface of what's possible. And that's where we'll be stuck. We have really two choices. We can either kind of be pulled along as the rest of the world starts to adopt, or we can get ahead of the curve and challenge ourselves to look into this stuff and keep an open mind about experimenting and trying new things. Sometimes it's going to flop. Just in the interest of transparency, I'll give you an example. Typically, when we do these kinds of events, we've done them as team live events, and I would see none of you. And the experience isn't as good. The only way to ask questions was via chat. Well, Vanessa and I thought, let's try something. Let's try running as a Teams meeting. And what I've learned is people keep popping up in the lobby. It's kind of annoying to me as a presenter. But so what? All the goodness of seeing everybody and all that, and it's worked out pretty darn well. It's going to be way better. I wouldn't have got there without being open to trying that. Kind of a silly example, but my point is there's going to be ups and downs. You got to take the good with the bad, and you're never going to find any of the good if you aren't willing to take some risks and challenge some of your habits. A lot of it is really its mindset and culture. If you can't be open, it's just not going to happen. And really, that's got to come from the top down. It does. All right. Lastly, now, underpinning all of this, in my estimation, is trust. Super important. I mean, you can't really get anything much done in life without trust. So I came across this info about trust and building it virtually. I just wanted to share it with you all. I don't have my mind fully around it, but I can see some value, and I just wanted to share it, even though I don't consider myself an expert in this area. If we look at the foundations of trust, there's a lot of different models out there. Likable, responsible, confidential, and knowledgeable. There's some basics that go along with fostering those, and how we do that in real life. Be interested, not interesting, for example. We all know, especially those of us in sales and marketing, that it's a key skill. Be more interested in other people than yourself, and that results in likability. Virtually, though, that gets a little more difficult, right? And so one of the key skills is understanding the person ahead of time and who you're dealing with. And there are digital tools that help with that as well. I'll give you an example of one. It's outside the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, but many, if not all of you, I would imagine, use LinkedIn. There's a tool out there called Crystal Knows that allows you to input someone's LinkedIn profile, and it will give you sort of a disc profile return on that is scarily accurate. So useful in a sales and marketing context especially, but just in kind of in personal relationships too. It's harder to get info when we're not in person, so just consider that. The other thing I wanted to touch on here is the collaboration format. You got to be planful. And the water cooler conversations, they don't happen. I know that you've probably all heard this, but really think about what have you done to line up a town hall, to line up and foster like a virtual get-together, to line up something, right? If we don't plan for it, if we don't have it supported from the executive level, if we don't have the middle managers lining those things up and encouraging people to participate, and managing those who resist, managing some of that resistance and having that become the new cultural norm, it's not going to happen. And I'm here to tell you folks, hybrid, it's not going away. There's recently a piece in the Wall Street Journal that caused some buzz on LinkedIn. We all heard Jamie Dimon say, everybody's coming back, I don't care. And I'm sure there are certain organizations that's going to happen, and I'm not here to tell you otherwise. But I am here to tell you that something fundamentally changed in the world in the last couple of years, and there are new norms evolving. That's my point here. And the ways that we build trust are evolving right along with it. Re-examine those norms and think about these kinds of things and have a bit of a plan and try some things out. Lastly, think about how your technology integrates. Look at that second column on what I said about planner. One of the foundations of trust is responsibility, right? Does this person execute or don't they? Well, part of that is facilitating that via a tool. There's tools that are designed for it. Planner's the one listed here. Pick your poison and insert it there. But you can see where I'm going. The tools are designed by people whose literal job in business it is to think about the kinds of things that I've discussed today and design software to help facilitate it. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily a fit for your organization, but consider what is and be planful over time integrating some of these things, and you'll be better off. If not, like from a big picture, and this is a big swing, but we all know businesses open and close, and you don't want to be left behind. Way better to be ahead of the curve. I'm of a belief that change is inevitable, and the only thing that's really optional is the pain. where are you going to put it? You can incur some of the pain and get the results early, or you can wait until you get dragged along and miss out on a lot of the upside. Which camp would you rather be on? I know that's a little challenging, but I think I'll leave that there for you as my charge. Take something from what you've seen here today. Take some of those assets that I mentioned, look some stuff up, and try some stuff out. That's all I'm suggesting. It's a new world, and there's an awful lot of opportunity for us all out there if we're only willing to open up, challenge some of our habits, and try some new things. Some of them won't work, and we put them back on the shelf. Some of them, we're going to be surprised how amazing they are. I pass. I don't know what to say now. Ding. Vanessa, we said at the end of our sales meetings is kind of a joke, or sales and marketing meetings, referencing back to me as a facilitator having a big time clock at one point. Probably a little too controlling or trying to influence too much. But I tried something and it didn't work great, and it resulted in kind of a fun cultural meme that we still use. So there you go. It's in action, right? Any questions, Vanessa, in the chat? Anybody want to unmute and share their experience, in brief, or ask any questions? I'm happy to field questions that would be useful. And I'll also extend the offer, if you want to talk about any of this stuff more in depth offline, I'm open to connecting if you want to contact me.
Not seeing any questions come through. You must have just done such a great job presenting.
Well, I don't know about that, but thank you. It's an awful lot to chew on. I mean, a lot of this stuff is new. Some of the tools are new. The cultural norms are evolving, right? We've all been kind of thrust into the limelight with some of this stuff over the last couple of years. So, awful lot to digest. I'm not offended by the lack of questions. I don't have my mind around all of it yet. I'm just on the front end.
We have, saw some questions come through. Okay. Someone just did a quick search for Planner. Can you talk more about integration or licensing?
Yep, I'm going to hop out of present mode, so hopefully I look a little better, or worse, depending on what you think of me. I don't know. I'm not intimately familiar with Planner licensing. What I would say is if you go to that Jump to 365 site that I mentioned, and I think Vanessa threw it in the chat there, thanks, man. You can click on the Planner application and in that periodic table, and it will show you what licenses have Planner and which don't. In terms of integration, if you want to unmute, Randall, and tell me more of what you mean there, I might be able to provide some more color if you're open to that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate it. So I just did a quick Google on Planner, and I didn't dive real deep just because we didn't have any time here. But there's some rhetoric talking about newer versions coming with deeper integration into Teams. But I don't know if that's an old conversation or a new conversation. And then they also talked about integration into Outlook as well. Yeah,
thanks, Randall. Yeah, that's helpful. I don't know anything about the Outlook integration. What I can tell you is that Microsoft is evolving in terms of the Teams integration, evolving how they're doing that. There's a separate application called To Do, which is sort of an amalgamation of Planner tasks and the older style Outlook tasks from Exchange, if you're familiar with those. And it has a place for you to add your own individual tasks. And Microsoft has taken a version of that and rolled it up into Teams. To get more detailed than that, I don't have the info, but that Jump to 365, that Matt Wade MVP that I mentioned, go to that site. And he has a pretty good article that outlines the differences. That's one of the things that I really like about him is he really gets into the detail, but provides it in a way to somebody like myself who's somewhat technical, but I'm not a certified technician or anything, can still understand it. And he has a table that lays out the differences. So it's ongoing. They're tightening up the integration. There is a way to access some Planner tasks and embed plans in your Teams. There are some differences and some caveats. So when you get to that level of integration, you want to read some of the support articles and figure out where you want to create your plans, whether you want to do it directly in Teams in a channel or whether you want to do it outside through the Planner app natively. But that's about as much as I know. I would look to Matt Wade in that Jump to 365 for additional color and more detail.
Yeah, and Randall, I can add to that. The way we use it at Success, or at least my team uses it, we do pin it as a tab in our marketing team, so it's always accessible. And there is also a module on the side of your teams that you can add that integrates all your tasks across all the different plans that you're part of, so you can see your master to-do list. And then if you want to see individual plans, you can click in from there as well. So there's lots of integration available. I just think it just totally depends on your needs and how you want to use it.
You bet. Thanks, Vanessa. It's a pretty blank canvas in a lot of ways, but there's an awful lot of power there. As I mentioned, I like using it individually. That's really helped me stay organized.
All right, next question. Judd, can you talk more about how Success is exploring hybrid collaboration?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I'll mention for the group's benefit, I see that Jason asked that. Hi, Jason. Nice to see you. I saw Jason earlier this week. Physical spaces play a role. We were in the fortunate position at Success of having started an office remodel right before the pandemic began, and we were already upgrading our equipment for some more advanced AV capabilities. So that's part of the equation, is thinking about, in meeting rooms and in individual offices, maybe somebody needs a better webcam, a better microphone. We have cubes here in our office, and things can get noisy if people are trying to take meetings at our desk. So perhaps having some good noise canceling headphones becomes a norm. I have my own pair and I use that. That's key equipment. But more broadly in the Teams ecosystem, there is something called a Teams Rooms license, and there's accompanying equipment, touchscreen PCs to start meetings intuitively with a native Teams experience like we have here, and then mic, AV, camera arrays, all different flavors of that can be integrated into a physical room to allow virtual participants a better experience along with in-person participants, so hybrid that way. Other than that, a lot of it is, I hate to call it ad hoc, but I think that's accurate. Vanessa and I on the marketing department, we're a relatively smallish department, and we have an informal charge by the president of our organization to lead on some of this stuff. So we'll try things out, and then we'll pilot it through things like our town hall that I mentioned this afternoon. That's one way that we're kind of evangelizing some of the benefits. That security approach that I described, I've been evangelizing that, in the town halls and otherwise. So really, it's not as much to your question about exploring as it is figuring out at least our experience is, or my experience of success is, figuring out, hey, you like that? Go ahead and run with that. Like, you have the support of the leadership team here to help shape and set the cultural norms. I used to write a blog at Success. I'm the son of word people. My mom was a reading teacher. My dad was an attorney, so I'm kind of a word geek. And I was asked to write a blog for a while about grammar and writing and such, but that evolved into business skills material. There's only so much you can say about commas, and that was an opportunity for Vanessa and me to shape cultural norms about Teams, because there are cultural norms behind these tools. I'll give you an example. IM isn't great for everybody all the time. And our phone coverage team, sometimes IM is super interruptive, and they want an answer right now when that team needs to be on call or customers calling in, right? So we had to shape the cultural norms, and part of the way we did that was through that blog that I mentioned about, okay, here are some of the practices about the norms we want to set at Success. So using one tool, we wrote that on SharePoint and distributed it that way to set and shape and reinforce some of those cultural norms, and do it, again, in a medium that it was an email. We could have sent out an email, but that's lost, right? For future people, that it's present on our intranet so that new people can be pointed towards that asset during onboarding. Is one of the ways we're setting and shaping those norms. So I'm getting a little bit of feel of your original question there, Jason, but my point is, it is about exploration. It is about having executive support for that. And more than anything, it's about needs discovery and understanding, all right, what are my options in the tools that might help meet that, and trying some stuff out. So look for your people who are open to new experience and leverage them that way, is my experience with my through change management channels. Look through the people that are interested in that and nurture their experience, their interest in doing that, and give them explicitly permission to go ahead and do that, and help them carve out a little bit of time, and you'll be surprised at what you find, I'd guess.
Thanks, Judd. Really appreciate that. That's exactly where we are. as an organization, just trying to explore what should be our new norms. How do we go forward in sort of empowering people to be more effective in their work?
Yeah, and for me, like personally, it was a big moment for me when the president of our organization was like, "You're interested in this stuff? Go ahead." Somehow that permission part, or just that nudge, made all the difference in the world. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll run with this. Otherwise, there's this phenomenon where everybody thinks somebody else is doing it right all too often. So that's one way to kind of, I guess, to combat that, but to make some progress in that vein. See another question here, Vanessa, from Pilgrim. We got about 5 minutes left, but I'll try to cover that if I can. I'm at a small organization doing pretty well with teams, but start learning SharePoint. I don't necessarily have any pointers for a book. I would go back to that Jump to 365 site and start there. But first, what I'm hearing you is express, and this is pretty common, and I don't mean it critically, you're expressing your question in terms of tools rather than needs. I would look at what the needs are and then find the tools that meet it, because SharePoint may or may not be the right tool. And you may have already done that, I don't know. But I always like to start there is, okay, what are the needs? What are the fundamental jobs to be done? And one way that might help you is if you do that, Google the Microsoft Modern Collaboration Architecture, and you look at that presentation that I ran through with the circles and all, look at those rectangles around each of those circles and figure out, okay, what is most important here and what are you trying to do? SharePoint is a really vast ecosystem, so the answer to your question would depend on, are you trying to work with files? Are you trying to, communicate in a mass way? What is it that you're trying to do? And SharePoint may or may not be the right forum for you, especially given the smaller size of your organization. You might be just okay with using Teams, which has some interplay with SharePoint in the background. So I'd be actually interested and happy to talk with you if you wanted to contact me, and we could go more in depth offline. But that's where I would start, is needs discovery generically. And then that blog from Matt Wade it's really powerful stuff. And if you see anything that sparks your interest there about what he's written about SharePoint, you'd probably find a lot of value in his articles, especially about kind of the files ecosystem and how OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint all interact. Sounds good.
We have one more question, if we can answer it in less than a few minutes. Giving a brief description of the format of a town hall versus a weekly all hands type meeting, or are they the same?
Well, that's a great question, Eric, and I'm not sure, but here's what I'll tell you from the top of my head. To me, just kind of on their face, town hall and the way we run ours is there are some items that the executive team wants to cover, and we cover those, but a lot of it's about connection, it's about presence, it's about, there's always a forum ahead of time where, hey, if you want to send in questions, you can, and then during the meeting, they solicit questions as well. So it's, part of it is about instructional and kind of broadcast, but part of it is about kind of community and feeling and coming together and having some fun in the chat. I mentioned the memes and the whatnot, and people just kind of joking around. That's super important, that connection. To me, all hands kind of conjures up more of the former, the, hey, here's stuff you need to know, more businessy rather than connection based. And I don't think it's bad to intermingle those two. But so semantically, it might be just a question of semantics, but that's how we run our town hall. Is there's some it's all business, right? But there's some more kind of formal, hey, here's things you need to know, conveyance of information, getting everybody in front of the executive team. And some of it is about connection, whereas all hands to me is more nuts and bolts details that way. So I don't think it's, in terms of tools, I'll say this additionally, even though you didn't ask, we just record our town halls. If you want to be planful with an all hands meeting in the way that I described, if that's how you're thinking of it, it wouldn't be bad to have some sort of a recap, maybe using the automated transcription that I noted to capture notes, and then have somebody kind of recap that and then post it somewhere on your intranet on SharePoint or something like that to sort of operationalize and reinforce. One thing I know from change management is repetition is key. So for what it's worth, that plays in as well. But to me, they're roughly the same thing, with the difference might being the kind of the connection part.
All right, Judd, one final question, and I think I can actually help take this one. This one's from Chad. Anything that we've done specifically at Success in the buckets of building trust? And I want to give one example. So when we all went hybrid, obviously we're aware that it's harder to connect with each other and get that in-person feeling. So one thing that the marketing team did was we built a forum for everyone in the organization to submit their marketing ideas or requests. So typically, these requests would come in through people and they would email maybe one or two of us from the marketing department. They'd get lost in our inbox and no one was a clear owner of responding to those emails. However, by setting up a form through Microsoft Forms, putting it on our home SharePoint page, everyone now in the company has a voice and they can use that form to submit their requests. And then the marketing team reviews those every single week and we triage them appropriately. And we make sure to follow up with those. And the following up is key. So we use a SharePoint list where we indicate the status of that request. So it's in review or received. And then we'll also change the status to like completed once that task is complete, and that just really gives a lot of visibility and transparency to the rest of the organization. So maybe that concept can be kind of replicated in different ways across your organization.
Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, and I'll add just quickly too, and I suppose this won't be a surprise to you, Chad, knowing that you're involved in EOS and whatnot, but the regular touch points got to be virtual as well. You know what I mean? We have built in those check-ins since they are less likely to happen ad hoc, so we still have, even though we're in the office sometimes now and see each other, we still have regular, for the marketing team, it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Sometimes we cancel them, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, really, but it's good to have that cadence to remind us. There's one other thing, but that's okay. If it comes to me and it seems important, I can holler at you separately, Chad.
Well, I think we got through all the questions.
Good. I'm grateful we had some questions there. It would have been fine without, but it's sure fun to talk about this stuff. I love it. So to wrap it up, I'll just say thanks everybody, and again, extend the offer. There's a lot to learn. I don't know everything. If you've got ideas, I'd love to hear them. I'm a fan of learning from others where I can. I didn't make any of this stuff up. I'm not smart enough. So love to hear your experience. If you want to connect and kick the ball around some of this kind of stuff, please hit me up. Juddm, Juddm at fccnet.com is my email. You can find me on LinkedIn or just give the Success Office a call. But I really thank you for your both your time and your attention today. Sorry, I had to slide that one in there. I'm a pun guy and a cheesy joke guy, as Vanessa knows. So I'll leave it there. Thanks everybody for your attention. Really appreciate it. Take good care.
Thanks everyone.